Hello and welcome to Homebrew Heresy, where we bring your heretical ideas to life, taking on favorite factions and characters and bringing them to Warhammer 40k. So, I'm sure you're at least somewhat familiar with the race of robots known as the Transformers. I mean, most of my audience was in their early teens when Michael Bay movies came out. But luckily for us, those movies don't try to tell the full stories of the Transformers. Or at least I hope that's not the story they were trying to tell, because that story was awful. Because the universe and mythology of the Transformers series is one of those things that, much like the Power Rangers comics, just goes needlessly hard for no goddamn reason. I mean, there was that YouTube video that blew up about how bad of a monster Soundwave actually was, to the point that Megatron literally had to become a good guy to stop him. And not to fight him, but just simply being a good person itself was so illogical to Soundwave, it literally broke his mind. Though, as cool as that is, I'll never forgive the IDW comics returning the literal god of the Transformers, yes, there is a god, stay with me on this one, into a therapist with amnesia. I'm sure someone liked that twist, but not me. Primus should only ever be the planet Cybertron itself. But enough saw on the runtime, let's get to covering their origins and history of the Transformers. The first Cybertronians were created by the god Primus, a being of light and order and the brother and mortal enemy to the dark god Unicron. Yes, for real, stay with me, come on. Following his final battle with his mortal enemy and brother, Primus would fall into a sort of stasis sleep. His body became the planet Cybertron itself, but with his last act, he created the 13 Primes. Each one possessed a fraction of their god's power and all bore unique abilities as a result. Among the Primes were such figures as Alpha Trion, a wise and stalwart figure who would inspire and mentor both Orion Pax and D16 to take up arms against Sentinel Prime. Then you have Vector Prime, the protector of the multiverse. Yes, for real, there's a Transformer who can access the multiverse. But what's more wild? Dude can cut through realities. And if we're just throwing flexes around, we can't ignore Quintus Prime, the creator of life. His careless desire to propagate life literally led to him creating the Quintessons, or the faction that would later fight and enslave the Cybertronian race themselves. Side note, I find this hilarious because it's basically the opposite of an AI uprising. Instead of organic life-making robots who overthrow them, it's a robot creating living creatures who wipe them out. And of course, we can't ignore the two strongest primes. Yes, Vector Prime wasn't even the strongest. And if I'm going to be completely honest, he wasn't even the top 3. Second place goes to Zeta Prime, the leader of the Primes and the protector of the Matrix of Leadership. Basically a really powerful relic that gives whoever wields it a direct connection to the god Primus himself, as well as being able to call on the guidance of all the other Primes and even Primus himself in times of crisis for aid. But the most powerful Prime goes to none other than Megatronus himself. What's funny to me is that this guy has no feats or even known abilities, yet is universally agreed to be the most powerful by basically everyone in universe. It honestly kind of reminds me of the Primarchs, where you have characters like Magnus who can move planets through the warp and yet is seen as weaker when compared to people like Ferrus Manus, Horus, or even Sanguinius. Though honestly, that might be just some of my bias peeking out. So together, these 13 demigods effectively were charged with not only protecting the planet Cybertron, but also watching over the other creations of Primus, those being the other Transformers. Using each of the 13 primes as prototypes, the first generation of Cybertronians were created, literally being formed out of the well of all sparks. Basically a big-ass hole in the ground where Cybertronians crawl out of, being born from the liquefied metal of the planet's surface. Alongside that, each frame is also filled with a spark, or a physical manifestation of their soul alongside a sliver of Primus's very being. So again, just like the Primarchs were literally made out of fragments of the Emperor's soul. And that's just the beginning of their nearly 4 million long history. Yes, 4 million years. Not war in heaven old, but definitely old enough to be considered ancient in the universe's standards. And of course, to explain what continuity I'm going to be using for this video, I'm using my own continuity, where I cherry pick the parts from each one that I like and incorporate that into a single version. So following the creation of the first generation of Transformers, the Primes would lead their race into an era of societal and technological development, though not before protecting their infant people from the terrors of the Predacons. These predatory Cybertronians were vicious hunters who fed on their weaker and smaller kin. Over time, the Predacons would be driven to extinction, and in the power vacuum left behind, the Transformers were able to finally build, grow, and prosper. This would begin the golden age of the people of Cybertron, as their planet literally became a paradise of gold and marble. At least until the Quintessons attacked. Claiming to be allies, they arrived on the planet Cybertron to harvest Energon. If you don't know what Energon is, it's basically the blood of Primus. This stuff is a form of super energy, being able to power virtually anything, including the Transformers themselves. What followed was known as the Quintesson War, and despite their best efforts, the Transformers could not defeat these new enemies. Betraying his brothers and mentors, the squire to the Prime, Sentinel, would join the Quintessons and sell his people into slavery. It's generally crazy what they got away with in this movie. Sentinel would decorate himself as a hero and a Prime, rewriting history and even desecrating the corpses of the Primes with a fucking smile on his face. Oh, and who could forget gaslighting his people into willingly accepting a caste system that punished all future generations of Transformers. literally having the T-Cogs, a cybernetic organ that allows for Cybertronians to transform, to be removed before they could be awoken. Dude was so evil he decided to cripple an entire generation, then manipulate them into working themselves to death. Eventually, however, this conspiracy would lead to two divergent groups rising to prominence: the Autobots, led by Orion Pax, and the High Guard, later renamed the Decepticons, which would be led by D16. With the leaders of these respective groups deposing the false prime, the pair would split on the future of Cybertron, and where the revolution ended, a civil war began. This is basically what 40k is now, honestly. I mean, think about how similar it is to the Imperium. You got a false prophet crowned in gold, hi dad, a bright blue paragon figure who looks out for the good of everybody, sup Gilliman, and a very angry warrior who suffered a life of gladiator battles and enslavement. Hey, how you doing, Angron? And of course, a massive civil war that split the entire faction in two. Oh, and if we throw in the Transformers Prime plotline, then we also have a literal all-powerful chaos god who communicates with his followers mentally and raises the dead as an army of zombies. God, I miss this show. Predaking was the best character in the series, and you cannot convince me otherwise. He's up there with Grimlock from my all-time favorite characters in the Transformers franchise. Fucking love Grimlock. I think we're getting a little bit off topic here. So let's get to covering their weapons, armor, and abilities. So part of this is going to be a bit hard given the fact that a Transformer basically can have whatever weapon they need or want. So to keep this simple, we'll start off easy with Cybertronian physiology. This would be a natural weapon for them, and given the fact that Cybertronians are literally robots, we can assume they inherently possess a number of traits that organic creatures would not have. This includes superior strength, speed, durability, minor regenerative abilities, immortality, and immunity to exhaustion and extreme environments. If I need to tell you why this is an S tier ability, then I don't know what to tell you because it's just awesome in general. And on top of being literal walking tanks, each Cybertronian is also armed like one. From the Requiem Blaster, a weapon used by Megatronus and the only one able to kill a Prime. Maybe that's a bit hyperbolic, but considering the only time we see Primes die in Transformers 1 literally requires them to be ambushed, outnumbered, and betrayed, I think it's pretty intense how powerful this weapon has to be. And not only that, this literally required them to get their hands on the Requiem Blaster and use it against the other Primes. You know, it's like saying, could 1,000 humans take a Space Marine with a power sword? It's like, yeah, sure they could, but they would have to grab his power sword to actually have a chance of winning, you know? And speaking of swords, we have the Star Saber. This is the oldest known weapon in the Transformers arsenal, being wielded by the first Prime, Prima. No, I'm not joking, I know his name is stupid, but get over it, he's actually pretty fucking cool. The Star Saber is basically an even more powerful power sword from Warhammer, and in some continuities can even fire a powerful and destructive energy blast. And if we're flexing, why don't we throw in this Forge of Solace and the Sun Harvester. One is an orbital space station that can literally create anything and even turn planets into Cybertron copies. The other one, however, is a massive pyramid-shaped structure that can literally turn stars and suns into pure energon. And before you ask, or in case you couldn't put it together already, yes, the Cybertronians do have space travel. Though once they've properly settled and colonized the world, the Cybertronians will usually go to work creating a space bridge. Basically, a space bridge is a portal that connects to another space bridge somewhere else in the universe and can allow for instant teleportation. And finally, probably most horrifying,
the Immobilizer. It causes instant stasis lock, though the victim remains fully conscious. A living death.
And talk about a good segue, because we can cover the most identifying feature of the Cybertronians, the T-Cogs. I mentioned it earlier, but the T-Cogs are what allows Cybertronians to transform. Gifted to them by Amalgamus Prime, the Cybertronians would modify their bodies to suit their needs and desires, as it became a reflection of their internal character arc. And by the time of the Beast Wars timeline, which takes place several generations after the end of the Cybertronian Civil War, the T-Cogs actually underwent a sort of technological evolution. This upgrade would allow the Cybertronians of this future timeline to be able to take on organic as well as mechanical alternate forms. And since we're discussing the T-Cogs itself, I think it's important to explain how it's used by the Transformers in times of war by covering their methods of war. First up, we have infiltration. While everyone associates the Transformers with giant walking robots, everyone forgets that the rest of the saying is, robots in disguise. When the Transformers arrive on Earth, they use their T-Cogs to adopt alternate forms that allow them to blend in. And if we're looking at the Michael Bay trilogy of Transformers films, we know the Autobots and Decepticons have been influencing Earth's history since the beginning. Plus, if you take what Sentinel Prime says in Dark of the Moon, we were gods once. This implies that at one point they are worshipped by supposedly lesser beings. Plus, when bots like Laserbeak, Ravage, and Soundwave exist, it's not hard to find out why they're so effective at infiltration and gaslighting the enemy. Next up, we have Shock and Awe. While a more subtle approach can be useful, no one is going to ignore the sheer terror of seeing two 30-foot tall robots duking it out in downtown Chicago. Their massive size combined with their powerful weaponry and incredible durability makes anyone who faces them quickly reconsider their options. Meanwhile, Transformers like Megatron and Shockwave are quick to use unrestricted and indiscriminate acts of violence against anyone and everyone who challenges them. Hell, even the Autobots have to agree it works, since they're used the Wreckers, a group of extremist Autobots so brutal and violent even the Decepticons fear them. Bulkhead and I believe Ironhide are both members, so imagine an army of just those guys running at you. And speaking of, we should talk about the heavy infantry options of the Cybertronians. Known as the Knights, these legendary warriors would scour the universe of evil. In a way, they were taking up a role similar to the Primes, hunting down predators from all across the stars. As well as that, however, the Cybertronians would also use mass infantry, as not all Cybertronians were veteran soldiers with centuries of experience and dozens of wars won under their belt. Sometimes there were literal faceless grunts who were only created to be killed by the main characters. These are the Viacons. Despite often being associated with the Decepticons, however, both them and the Autobots use these drone-like warriors to fill their ranks. And depending on the continuity, can sometimes be newly created Cybertronians, who literally weren't even given a spark and instead just pre-programmed loyalties and identities. So with all that covered, we can finally get to covering our goals for this homebrew. Starting off with a model-focused one, our faction should have a wide range of units and model sizes. This is to reflect the diverse sizes and methods of war we see the Transformers use. Secondly, for a mechanics-focused one, I think some sort of transformative ability is necessary. This can be abilities like the Space Marines' combat doctrines or the Orc Waz that provide a temporary boost to a stat or unit. Thirdly, for our lore-focused goal, having a faction that is not only as storied as the Transformers, but as politically diverse is necessary. So then with all that out of the way, we can finally get started in designing this homebrew. But first, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, then hit the bell button so YouTube's Machine Spirit can hear our prayers and see our growing community. And if you guys really want to support me, consider joining my Patreon and helping me fund my content crusade, and become one of my amazing supporters just like Gerald the Dwarven Host. Now then, let's get to some honorable homebrews. And I just want to be super honest with you guys, I really tried to make everything for this build work. I tried to make Knights and Mechanicus work, I tried Space Marines, and hell, I even tried Chaos Demons and Chaos Knights. But with all my efforts, I just kept coming back to them. To the Necrons. The Necrons are ancient beyond belief. Both factions are insanely old, especially in comparison to humanity, with both dating back millions of years before the modern era. Not to mention, both factions possess incredibly advanced technology, with the Sun Harvester being similar to the Celestial Orrery. And on top of that, both factions were at one point a multi-star empire before being crushed by a powerful enemy force, the Quintessons and the Old Ones respectively. And speaking of war, there are a lot of theories claiming the Necrons actually helped cultivate early humanity, as one Necron unit actually travels across the stars to inhabited worlds and teaches the primitives of that planet to worship the Necron people. And that's literally what Sentinel and the Decepticons were doing in Dark of the Moon. Plus, both races are immortal robots, obviously. But we can go deeper for the sake of the argument. For example, the Lich Guard could serve as a good proxy for the Knights. Meanwhile, the Primes could each be represented by an Overlord, as some of the crazy weapons in lore can only be accessed by the highest ranking Necron nobility. Meanwhile, the basic troop could easily work as the cogless miners we see in Transformers 1, or the Viacons that I mentioned earlier. And if we're gonna actually get crazy, the Catan Star Gods, especially one of the massive Tesseract vaults, could work as a proxy for Primus himself. And we can even extend this to the notable enemies of the Necrons themselves, those being the Eldari and Orcs respectively. In this case, when it comes to creating more for this army, I've got ideas on how we can incorporate both these factions. So then, with all that out of the way, let's get to covering what you'll need to buy for your own Transformers homebrew. So as always, I try to start with the combat patrol of the army I'm homebrewing. Taking a look at the Necron combat patrol, we get ourselves a Necron Overlord, 10 warriors, 1 Doomstalker, 3 Scorpec destroyers, and 3 Scarab swarms. This would run for a total of 445 points of enhancements, unless I'm wrong. So we can make this work with the limitations we've set up and requirements we need. So first off, I really like the Overlord for its design and points. The phase sword, regalia, and the badass vibe, or I guess aura is what the kids are calling it now. The real question is though, who will this guy be proxying? If you're new here, I try to assign each unit in this box set a character or sub-faction to stand in for. In this case, the Overlord, given his role in Necron society, would need to be a faction leader, like one of the Primes or Megatron himself. And best part is, thanks to the weapon options available to the Overlord, it isn't that hard to figure out. Give him the Overlord's blade and Tachyon arrow on top of a sick blue and red paint job, and you've got yourself an Optimus proxy. You like that? I fucking came up with that mid-script typing. And speaking of the Primes, proxying Sentinel is just as easy as a weapon swap. For this, we can give Sentinel a Void Scythe, a Strength 3 weapon in comparison to the Overlord Blade's 4, because Sentinel is a little bitch. And we can give him the Resurrection Orb to revive warriors and throw more of his own people at his enemies, because he'd rather see his people die than fight his enemies himself, because I repeat, Sentinel is a little bitch. And then when it comes to the leader of the Decepticons, we can keep the Resurrection Orb. Not just because the Decepticons use the Vehicons more than the Autobots, but also because in Transformers Prime, Megatron literally gets a zombie army. Great series, highly recommend to anyone who hasn't seen it. Then we can trade in the Void Scythe for a Staff of Light. This can serve as a stand-in for Megatron's Energy Flail or Megatronus' Spear. Plus, the staff also has a ranged weapon option, meaning we can have it double as Megatron's fusion cannon, even if the stats for it aren't as good as a Tachyon arrow. So with our Overlord proxy figured out alongside our warriors, we can start by looking at the rest of our units, and see what we need to keep and what we're looking to lose. And if I'm going to be honest, I think both the Doomstalker and Scorpic Destroyers are not making the list. I'm sure there are ways to fit this into the list, but for me, I think we can do better. First off, we'll trade the Scorpic Destroyers for a squad of Locust Destroyers. These ranged units are great stand-ins in general for the Transformers. Their above average movement speed combined with the fly keyword can make them easy proxies for any of the flyer Transformers. Plus, the Gauss cannons are able to do a lot of damage, with lethal hits, a strength of 5, and 2 damage. Plus, at the same points value as the Scorpic Destroyers, so really this is more of a side grade, if not an overall improvement. So far, we're at 265 points, so we've got a long way to go. So depending on what we're doing and how heavily we want to spec into our particular playstyle and faction identity is going to change how this list goes. But for today's build, I want to go for a Sentinel Prime / generic army loadout. So here's what we're going to need. Doubling up on our Vehicon / Necron warrior units, we can reflect the heroic aspect of the Transformers characters. Next up, we're going to want to get more elite and veteran units to single the disparity between the grunts and main characters. So for this, we'll throw in a group of 5 Lich Guard for 85 points. These guys can serve as more typical Transformers, plus are pretty decent in combat and work as excellent bodyguards to our noble Overlord. Plus, each one can be kit bashed to represent a particular ally in that army, like perhaps an RC or Starscream themed Lich Guard. And if we're going to include the Scarabs in this army, this is exactly 500 points, and we can easily have the Scarabs act as scouts or drones belonging to an Arachne proxy somewhere off the board. So in terms of rules and attachment, I think we're either going to go with the generic Awakened Dynasty or my personal favorite, the way more cool option, the Hypercrypt Legion. With Hypercrypt Legion, we can have one unit in our army leave the board on our opponent's turn. Then, on our turn, we can set that unit up anywhere else on the board. This can serve as both a proxy to the space bridge and the fact that the Transformers use orbital drops to land on worlds. And if that isn't your style, we can just reflavor the point where our models aren't on the board as instead them being transformed, and literally being robots in disguise. So then, with all that out of the way, we can finally get started on our homebrew and our story time. So let's get started. The Siberian dynasty is unique among the other Necron dynasties for various reasons, including their extremely premature awakening nearly 4 million years too soon. However, while most Necron dynasties would have aimed to quickly capitalize on the power vacuum, the Siberian dynasty did not have that luxury. Their awakening was done out of necessity and under threat of destruction. The Eldari, these ancient enemies of the Necrons, have dedicated their existence to their extinction and the destruction of their people. When the worlds of the Siberian dynasty fell under threat of craft-world Unicronia, it fell to the Council of Overlords to defend their pocket empire. These 13 overlords were originally low-born Necron tier who quickly became notable warriors. To honor these great warriors, each one was personally chosen to inherit the dynasty when it was discovered their ruler, Primus, would die without an heir to succeed him. Now, these 13 overlords had to face off a threat to their throne once more. For thousands of years, the battle between the Siberian dynasty and Unicronia would tear their corner of space apart. Before long, only Cybersia, the capital of the dynasty, and only a few other colony worlds were left. With no other choice, the 13 overlords were forced to unleash their greatest weapons and most ancient tools to stop the slow spiral into oblivion. In the end, they were victorious, shattering the craft world in the Battle of Cyberus Prime, but they had lost so much, including seeing their empire lost to them, as entire systems of sleeping Necrons and devoted primitives would be beyond their reach. What's worse, this sector-spanning conflict drew the attention of another enemy of the Necrons, the green-skinned Orcs. These barbarians invaded the worlds of the fractured Siberian Empire and pillaged everything they could. While one overlord attempted to reach out to the Orcs and civilize them, he was quickly educated into the error of his ways. Instead, all he did was make his enemies into a far greater threat. A threat that would eventually cost the overlords their life and see to their scribe, Sentinel, rising to power. Under his cowardly leadership, he saw to the total abandonment of his inherited empire, and the consolidation of any remaining forces onto their homeworld, willingly allowing his people to become blockaded within their own homeworld and forced to remain hidden, all while political and military leaders grow restless at the collapsing state of their empire and government. With the rise of the Necrons and the return of the Silent King alongside the formation of the Great Rift, there is hope that the Siberian dynasty can once again return to prominence. But who will lead them when that time comes? So, where are the Necrons of Cyversa now? Have they managed to leave their tomb world before it becomes their tomb? Was Sentinel deposed? Who replaced him? And what are the worlds of the Siberian Empire once controlled that is now lost to them? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And if you like this kind of content, why not check out another one of my videos? Maybe set up your own little crossover battle between the Transformers and the experiments from Disney's Lilo and Stitch. And I hope you guys enjoyed the content today, and I hope you guys enjoyed the Homebrew Heresy I had written for you guys. I really enjoyed writing this one, and it's really fun to go back to Transformers. But with all that out of the way, I can't wait to do more Homebrew Heresy videos, and feel free to leave any suggestions in the comments below. And if you guys want access to this script and any other future content I release on my Patreon, make sure to subscribe to that for more content. But with all that out of the way, I've got nothing else to say, and I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day. Bye!